O'Reilly. Are your wiper blades chattering, skipping, or squeaking? Don't let streaks or smearing on your windshield compromise your visibility. When it's time to replace your wiper blades, stop by O'Reilly Auto Parts and see our selection. Our professional parts people will even install your new wiper blades while you wait. Stop by O'Reilly Auto Parts today. O'Reilly Auto Parts.
There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store, or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today.
46% of Americans expect to leave behind financial obligations when they pass away. So it's crucial to make sure your family is financially protected. Policy Genius helps you find the right life insurance coverage by comparing options from America's top insurers with help from licensed, award-winning agents. Secure your financial future with Policy Genius. Head to policygenius.com to get free life insurance quotes in just a few clicks. That's policygenius.com.
Welcome to another episode of Meat Eaters Gear Talk Podcast with your hosts, Giannis Patelis and Jordan Budd. Today, we are joined by Cam. I'm going to mess up his last name. Rensinger. Did I say it right, Cam? I got it. I nailed it. Cam is the founder, owner of Nemo Equipment. And if you haven't heard of Nemo Equipment, you must have been living under a rock. 'Cause if you go into any REI these days, you don't have to walk probably more than 10 yards into that store, and you're going to see either a camp chair, a sleeping bag, a tent, and probably, I don't know, a few other items made by Nemo Equipment. They've been at it for a long time, make some super quality gear. But we're not really here to talk about Nemo in particular, but Cam is just going to talk to us about some general gear stuff, which we'll jump into in a minute. But Cam, is there anything I missed that you'd like to add to just like a general bio of yourself that you'd like to add in for our listeners?
Yeah, that was a good introduction, Giannis. I just want to say first, it's a super pleasure to join you guys. This one's been a little while in the making, so thank you for having me here today.
Well, we had to make a whole new podcast, just to make a spot for you, right?
That's right. The
regular Meat Eater podcast doesn't get technical enough for a guest like you that can dive into the the super technical aspects of gear that we're going to do today. So, anyways, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm stoked to be here to talk about gear and talk about some of that technical stuff. I just add to my background. I went to school for industrial design, so I'm a maker in the first place. Though I quote run the business these days, I'm still very involved in the product design and development. Having said that, I'm going to talk about some things today. I'm sure that I'm not the world's expert on. We have people on our team who are more qualified in materials and engineering, things like that. But I still am very involved. So hopefully I can share some good knowledge with your listeners. And I should also say, I didn't grow up hunting. I discovered hunting in no small part thanks to Steven Rinella and his writings years ago, and really have become a passionate sportsman myself. So for that reason, also I'm honored to be here.
Great. Yeah, we're happy that there's a large group of you, I think, that you find yourself in, right? That people that have come to hunting probably through Steven Rinella's, multifaceted media journeys.
That's right.
All right. Well, let's jump right in. Cam sort of gave us some ideas of what we could talk about when he was on, and the list is long. We're not going to be able to get to all of it. But what really caught Jordan's and my eyes was that, being that you've been in this business for like 25 years, you really had some points sort of just talking about like sort of what you've seen in like the changes. And obviously there's been a lot of different changes, but specifically speaking about like what drives the products that our companies are making. Without explaining the whole thing, why don't you just jump right in, Cam, kind of tell me your initial thoughts on that, and then Jordan and I can pick your brain a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's right, Giannis. When I set out to do Nemo in the first place, which was 20 years ago and a few months, I was a senior in design school. It was actually my kind of senior thesis project to finish up design school. Incorporated the business that spring and then moved into our first office a few days after graduation. I was young and idealistic. I didn't have a lot of bills to pay. I hadn't run a business before. My business plan actually said I would be profitable in 6 months. It took about 12 years to make that happen. So, I had a lot to learn, but I had a few convictions to begin with. And one of them was I wanted to make really great gear and really be part of improving the experience of being outdoors. And I think that's true of really all the iconic brands, high-end specialty brands we would think of. The founders, I'm sure, were driven by a similar passion. But what I found, over these...
Hey, I just want to interrupt real quick. When you were thinking about making really good, great gear, were you already in that moment being like, man, there's space for more really great gear, or like I'm being let down by the current offerings? Is that where your head was at?
I was, and the industry and the consumer product world has changed a lot since then. So I think when we look around today, this would be less obvious. But 20 years ago, there was still actually a lot of white space. I mean, there were still a lot of products yet to be invented. There was a lot of improving still to be done. So I looked around. Actually, I got the mountain gear catalog in the mail a couple times a year, and that was kind of my basis for sort of seeing what was out there for mountaineering and backpacking gear. And I noticed, that it was pretty much the same stuff year after year. And so, I was, and some of it was being 25 years old and pretty idealistic and naive again, but I saw a lot of opportunity. And at the time I was actually working for MIT, paid for by NASA to work on spacesuit designs. I had an office at MIT. So I was surrounded by, engineers on the one hand and product designers on the other. And then on the weekends, I was heading off to the mountains. So I had this picture in mind of kind of merging all those things together. But back to your previous question, what I've noticed in the couple of decades since is, I think as a result of this culture that we've been in of kind of measuring our success to some degree by the amount of stuff we surround ourselves with, the world is, there's been such a proliferation of things and such a drive to make those things less and less expensive. The quality has been a victim in many cases of that. And I think when you're doing serious activities like backcountry hunting, where you're really, especially in certain moments, depending on the gear to perform or to keep you safe even, it's still worth it to buy the best stuff. And then the question becomes, how do you discern the difference between really high quality things and not so quality things so you're not wasting your money? And I think that's what you were getting at is maybe something to explore a little bit today.
Yeah, 100%. Like I wanted to see or hear you talk about the changes that you just explained and have seen over 20 years of, probably in your competitors. But I guess, can you give me some examples that you saw? And you don't have to name any of your competitors or other outdoor brand companies' names, but just give me an example of like how that would actually come to fruition.
Totally. Yeah, let's make it concrete. So, and I won't disparage any brands, but I can give some positive examples of some things that really exhibit quality and have lasted. And I can also, maybe I'll start by just relaying one of the first lessons I learned about quality as I came into our industry was around coatings. So today, Nemo makes a variety of products, as you mentioned, but we started out just as a tent maker. And a really important part of making a tent, of course, is making it waterproof. And there's basically two different polymers that are typically used to make a tent waterproof, either polyurethanes or silicones. And we can get into that.
Is that the fabric you're talking about, or the coating on the fabric?
That's the coating. That's the coating on the fabric. And we could nerd out and kind of go deep on that, but just holding that notion for a second.
Sure.
We decided in the early days of Nemo that urethanes was the direction we were going to go. And so, a couple of years into Nemo, we had been, developing at that point, tents, making a lot of samples. Eventually, I started the company in 2002. Eventually, we started sales in 2006. By the time we really kind of squared away the designs and were ready to go to market. And by, say, 2007, 2008, we had samples now sitting in our storage, in our archives for 2, 3, 4 years. And I can't remember the day and the year, but I remember the moment of going into the sample room and pulling out a relatively old sample. And as soon as I opened the drawstring on the storage bag, just being hit in the face with this gnarly smell and pulling the sample out, and it's all like stuck together and like sort of like toffee. The coating had just dissolved and totally degraded. And, for me, young guy, entrepreneur on a mission to make a great brand and make the best product, this was like, holy crap, what's going on here? Like I'm going to have to, there's a lot I'm going to have to learn here. I got to get to the bottom of this. Mm-hmm. And so that kicked off, kind of a journey for us that took years of really understanding urethane coatings and kind of getting to the bottom of what's going on in the supply chain and how to control that. And the short of the story of what happened there is urethane coatings, as I understand it, were actually really pioneered by the U.S. military many decades ago as a means of waterproofing that had really excellent cold weather resistance. It's kind of stay pliable regardless of temperatures and quite durable. And our own domestic coatings manufacturers really led that process, developed, great chemicals. And so the early polyurethane coatings were ether-based chemistry and would last many, many years. And as the sporting goods industry's supply chain moved to Asia, a lot of that kind of know-how was lost, and the supply chain, sort of the whole supply chain behind the cut, make, sew factories, all the yarns, the chemistries, everything went with that, of course, to Asia. And before too long, ether coatings started to get replaced by ester coatings because ester coatings are much less expensive. But ester hydrolyzes or breaks down with water quite easily. And so in those early days of Nemo, we're having no idea that that's what we were doing. We were buying into this supply chain where quality had eroded because no one was really paying attention to it. And we were putting lousy quality urethane on those early samples. So that's an example of, in that case, sort of due to a migration of kind of the know-how as supply chains have moved around the world. But, at the same time, I think, the consumer in the sort of post-Amazon, post-Walmart world that we live in, there's so much cost competition. It's always putting pressure on brands that want to grow, particularly want to grow, in the sort of bottom half of the market, to lower prices, even as labor costs go up, materials costs go up, and something has to give when you do that. And so over the years, I've seen, the market increasingly being flooded with stuff that really isn't built to last. And as sort of an opposite example, I was thinking about this this morning in anticipation of this discussion of just a couple of products in my own life that have been remarkably high quality. And two that come to mind for me are, I'm an avid motorcycle guy. I've been a dual sport guy for a long time. when I was a couple of years in Nemo, I'm still not really paying myself much of a salary. I made a stretch and bought a BMW 650 Dakar and the BMW Rally jacket to go with that, which is a really expensive jacket at the time. And it was just, I forget exactly, but it was a lot of dollars. I still have that jacket.
Now, you bought that jacket for aesthetics to go with that fancy bike, or was it
partly,
because
yeah,
it was
partly,
performance?
I was 20-something years old. I wanted the Beamer Dual Sport with the awesome Beamer Rally jacket to go with it. But also, I was planning trips to Mexico and Canada and wanted the performance features that came, like the Rally jacket's got a lot of cool ventilation and has a waterproof liner and some really smartly engineered armor components and stuff like that. So it's, to me, it was a value in both being cool, but also being, really delivering on the performance side. But I still ride with that. This morning, I was out on my bike, still ride with that same jacket 18 years later. And because it's red, it has some red components on it, and red pigment tends to fade faster than other colors. Mm-hmm. It's a little faded, but otherwise the functionality of that jacket is exactly the same as it was 18 years ago. And likewise, I still climb, although I don't ice climb nearly as much these days, in fact, pretty infrequently in the last few years. I still have the same pair of La Sportiva Nepal top boots I bought when I was in college almost 30 years ago. And I just want to say it's hard to, we can get into the details a little bit, but the challenge of making products that will do that, actually, a pair of boots that will last you for 30 years or a jacket that'll, ride through rain and sun for 18 years, it's hard and requires, real investment in design and engineering, in testing, and in a lot of things that are very hard to sell on the shelf. The quality of stitching and coatings and yarns and things that the customer are not going to immediately be able to identify when they're kind of staying there looking at something on the rack, is really essential to meeting that kind of longevity.
Well, let's just go back to like the tent example when you're talking about the different urethane coatings. You guys obviously learned and went to the ether was the good one?
Yes.
The ether coating. So did you go back to that? And then were there other companies that just continued to produce the ester based coating and just made a lesser product?
It took a little while for the industry to figure out what was going on. I think, we live in the sort of subset. If you were to look at kind of our industry as a pyramid of, the top of the pyramid being kind of the most high performance, most expensive, and smallest market products, to the bottom of the pyramid being the opposite of that. We live in the top third of that pyramid, say, and all of the brands essentially in that space, are committed to making great product. That's how you earn and retain your spot, kind of in that stack, if you will. But it took the industry a while to figure that out. I mean, we swap notes with other competitor brands and retailers in the space, and collectively sort of put our heads together and reined in that supply chain over a matter of years. And today, that issue of hydrolysis is well understood, and you shouldn't be buying a quality tent or rain jacket or anything else that's coated with urethane and seeing it become really stinky and toffee-like anytime soon.
I see. So this isn't like a thing where the consumer has to be like, all right, next time I'm going tent shopping, I need to check which urethane it was made with, because it's been figured out.
It has been figured out by the high-end brands, but it is the difference between, going into a specialty store and spending a few $100s on a reputable tent brand and, say, buying a very inexpensive tent from a box store.
Can you give a high level on the silicone coatings versus like that polyurethane?
Yeah. So silicone's great, actually. And we try to use it where we can. It actually will retain more of the strength of the fabric. Like you can make in an apples to apples comparison, you can make a stronger silicone coated fabric than urethane coated fabric. So that would, that's almost always going to be very appealing. it's generally lighter too, which is great. The challenge of it, as we know about silicone from other places in our lives, we see it is nothing wants to stick to it. So you can't seam tape a silicone tent. And over the years, some brands like Hilleberg was really at the front end of this many years ago, have developed stitching techniques, kind of combinations of threads and needles, and kind of folding techniques for seams that will, for the most part, block water from coming through stitches. And a lot of that theory is actually shared with like the canvas tent industry, where if you use a thread that will absorb some water, actually, it'll swell up and kind of fill the stitch hole and stop water from moving through it. But we have not found that to be as reliably waterproof as taping a tent. And so though we've dabbled with it over the years, we generally prefer to use urethane-based coatings.
Nice.
Interesting. So what about, instead of seam taping, you just take the, what's that stuff, like seam grip?
Seam seal, yeah.
Seam seal, and just seal the whole thing.
You can do that. It's a pretty big burden on the consumer, is kind of our outlook on that. Like, if we can deliver to you a tent that right off the shelf is going to be waterproof, we'd rather, without other significant downsides, we'd rather do that than give you a tent and a tube of seam grip and ask you to take your very expensive high-end tent and try to do a halfway decent job. Sounds like you've tried this before, Jordan. It's
oh yeah,
it's tough to do well. It has a lot of VOCs. It's pretty smelly stuff. I mean, if you're doing it in the house or the apartment, it's pretty noxious. So if, again, our mission, we did actually make a mountaineering tent in the early days where you had to seam grip it, but as soon as we figured out how to not require that of the customer, we moved away from it.
Well, and how come a company just can't do the seam sealing itself?
Well, in a sense, that is what we do. I mean,
by taping it is what you're
doing.
By
taping it, yeah. I mean, and the truth is, Giannis, I think someday we'll look back and think stitching a tent is a pretty silly thing. Stitching anything you want to be waterproof is kind of silly, because we're we're punching a zillion holes in it, and then we're having to go back and figure out how to cover all the little holes. So another thing brands like us have worked on over the years is trying to just weld tents together. There are many welded products, as we all know, out there at this point. But the challenge we found there is around weight. By the time you have enough coating or lamination on the fabric to create a good weld, because it's not the yarns that fuse together. It's either the coating that gets knifed on or the lamination that gets bonded to the fabric that becomes the glue, because it's like hot glue. When you put that seam through heat and pressure, that coating or film melts and becomes the glue that joins everything together. By the time you have enough of it on there, you become uncompetitive in weight. And if you think about, like, we're making 2-person tents, we and other high-end brands are making 2-person tents in the realm of 2 pounds. I mean, 2 pounds is not a lot of material. You spread that out over a whole floor and canopy and fly, and you're talking about gossamer thickness stuff and just having to really optimize everything.
What's that term you just used? Gossamer thickness?
Yeah, just like really, really thin, airy kind of stuff at this point.
Interesting. Yeah, that's an interesting point, that even though it can't really be done today, that in probably 10 years, there might not be a rain jacket that has stitching in it anymore, huh?
We'd all love to move that way. I mean, it would deliver more value to the customer in a couple of regards. I mean, there's a lot of labor time in the stitching and seam sealing of a tent, so welding it would skip at least one step there. So it presumably could reduce some cost for the consumer. And then at the end of the day, again, if you're not punching a zillion holes, and you don't have to go back and patch holes. And we do find, over the very long term, the seam tape is still kind of the Achilles heel of the tent. You're basically taping over holes. It's not the mechanical connection of a stitched seam that tends to give. It's usually the tape over that that's the first victim. So we'd love to get rid of seam tape in the future.
I'll be looking forward to it.
O'Reilly Auto Parts are in the business of keeping your car on the road. O'Reilly Auto Parts offer friendly, helpful service and the parts knowledge you need for all your maintenance and repairs. If you're confused about what part you need, like what wipers are going to be the best, what replacement headlights are going to be the best, go into O'Reilly and talk to the people that work there, because they're great and they're super friendly, and they'll get you squared away where you walk out knowing you got the right thing. They've got thousands of parts and accessories in stock, either in-store or online, so you never have to worry if you're in a jam. Do you need your windshield wipers replaced? You need a brake light fixed? You need some quick service? They'll help you find the right part or point you to the nearest local repair shop for help. The professional parts people at O'Reilly Auto Parts are your one-stop shop for all things auto do-it-yourself, and you can find what you need in-store or online. Stop by O'Reilly Auto Parts today or visit us at O'ReillyAuto.com/MeatEater. That's O'ReillyAuto.com/MeatEater. You ever get that feeling you're stuck inside staring at screens and a primal urge kicks in? You crave wide open spaces, fresh air, the chance to connect with the land? Well, maybe it's time to find your own piece of the wild, but searching for property can be a maze. That's where Land.com comes in. They got millions of listings across the country, from mountain ranches to hidden fishing holes. Their search tools are like a seasoned guide helping you narrow down what you want. Land.com isn't just about buying and selling. It's about finding a place to hunt, fish, explore, or simply sit by a campfire and listen to the crickets. So head over to Land.com today to turn one day into today, because trust me, there's nothing quite like the feeling of standing on your own piece of earth. There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store, or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today.
Jordan, I have a lot of questions just about these techie questions, but I really want to get to like a real concrete example of something that like the listener can take home, or the next time they go, shopping at REI or Sportsman's or whatever, and they're just like trying to figure out if the quality is there, and if they're like, it's worth it to pay that extra money when whether it's, a rain jacket that's, $400 versus a rain jacket that's $100, or, the same thing in tents and sleeping bags. Like, is there just some sort of like tips or like, red flags you can like give for people to look out for when they're doing their shopping to when they're looking for better quality gear?
Yeah, for sure. And before I say that, I just want to say too that I still, all these years into our industry, I've accumulated a pretty good gear closet because, within our industry, we tend to swap gear with each other and offer, deals to each other and things. So I'm not for want of gear, and it becomes easy, I think, to get a little spoiled and complacent about just how expensive gear is. And, when we've met new friends over the years and, introduced them to the outdoors and they've got excited about camping, is always a moment when I realize like it's pretty darn expensive. Like, setting up the family and a couple of kids to really do camping and do it with good quality gear is a big investment. So I want to say, in the first place, I think really the way to think about it is finding value, for yourself based on what your needs are. And, it's kind of like if you're just commuting to work, then an ordinary car does a great job. If you want to race F1, you need a Formula One car, and there's a pretty big difference in price, and there's a very big difference in the materials and engineering and design and construction, and both are of value, right? It depends on the performance you're looking for. So, I think if you're going way out into the backcountry on a regular basis as a backcountry hunter, and you're needing to be self-sufficient, and you're going to face some pretty rugged conditions, that's justification, I think, for investing as much as you can in really gear that not only will perform again, but will also last. I mean, when I think about my moto jacket and the fact I've had it for 18 years, let's say it was $1,000 in the first place, which it wasn't that much, but it was quite expensive. How many lousy jackets I might have bought to replace one after the other in 18 years, and how quickly it would be a lot more than $1,000. So I think that to me, that's sort of the framework through which to look at it. Back to sort of the cues, one that I noticed, just having been in our industry a long time and looked at a lot of, we call them BOMs, or bill of materials. Like, as we're developing a product, we're formulating a list of every single component and every labor hour that's associated with building that. And that, ultimately drives what the retail price needs to be, based on, what margin we need as a business to support our business, and then the margin that the retailer needs, plus, potentially paying sales commissions and import duties and other factors. So I've looked at a lot of BOMs over the years, and I know where are the places that you spend money. And if you were a brand looking to sort of cut costs and have that not be super apparent to the customer, where you would likely do that. And, of course, the obvious place you would look is the stuff that's not going to be real apparent on the shelf. So a great example for me, and again, I'm just going to highlight, a couple of brands as we're talking that, or products, I think, that really have been exemplary over the years. I've always, since the early days of Arc'teryx, I've been a fan and appreciator of Arc'teryx stuff. And one of the things, I actually became good friends with one of the early employees of Arc'teryx, who's in our industry now, runs a big sales agency that we do some work with. And he told me many years ago that about 15% or so of the cost of making Arc'teryx clothing, now this was, call it 10, 15 years ago, but I presume is still true today, will never be appreciated by the customer. It's completely invisible to them. Is in seam tolerances and coatings and specs of materials and findings, like the little zippers and cords and things like that the customer's never gonna. It's not sold on the hang tag. It's not on the website as a bullet point, and most customers will have no idea. And it's just there on principle, about trying to make the best quality thing possible. If you don't have those kind of values, and you're looking to deliver a lower price point, and sort of hide, maybe have a lot of bells and whistles on a product, but kind of hide that you've cut corners, an easy place to do that is in webbing. And it's very hard to convey the difference between nylon and polyester and polypropylene webbing over a podcast.
I think the easiest way too, though, to explain it, the webbing is, because to me too, I'm kind of like, webbing, what's webbing? And I can think of like a strap that's made of webbing, but
yeah,
like, tell me where you would find webbing in outdoor products.
Yeah, good point. I sort of take for granted that term, but yeah. So webbing is like exactly as you said, Jonas. It's like a heavy strap, and it comes in different forms, from down to like a shoelace, to the seatbelt in your car. And there's a number of different ways to weave it. It can be flat, it can be tubular, but it's a very ubiquitous detail in outdoor gear, right? Like it forms the handles on things, it forms the tie down straps on, say, like on a lid of a backpack, where you would clip that in and then pull a strap, that's webbing.
Every strap on a backpack would fall into this category.
Every strap. So you really, with very few exceptions, you want those straps to be nylon. Nylon is the strongest of the polymers from which webbing is typically made. There's exotic stuff, aramids and things like that, but generally speaking, nylon's going to be the longest lasting, strongest choice. Polypropylene floats, which, in some boating applications is interesting. Like it can make great lines for a painter on a dinghy. It can be useful for it because it floats on water. But it's much weaker than nylon. It's also a lot less expensive. So I've seen so many bags, on the floor of retail that are meant to look awesome. They've got all the bells and whistles, tactical looking stuff, pockets everywhere, straps everywhere. And you get up close, and because I know that the tactile and visual differences, I can see right away that is not nylon webbing, that's polypro webbing. So that's just one of many examples.
So is that something though that if you're looking at backpacks, and I guess you could call the company, that if they have a good enough customer service where, someone real answers the phone, or if you're on the floor, say at Sportsman's Warehouse, if you're like asking the sales associate, hey, is that nylon or polypro webbing? Are they even going to have an answer for you?
It's a good question, and maybe not, right? Which is sort of part of the problem.
Yeah.
I think it reminds me of home improvement, and you and I were talking about this recently, but just the difficulty these days of finding really skilled, reasonably priced labor, just the challenge today of finding quality work. I think there's just, and this sort of back to the point I was trying to make in the beginning, there's a lot of really high quality stuff still out there in the world. I mean, there are many brands committed to making great stuff that will last, but there's a lot of noise around that. And I think it's if you want to really get the right equipment for yourself, there's kind of no choice today but to put a little time into becoming somewhat of an expert, to try to accumulate some of your own knowledge, because I think you're right. You're not necessarily going to find that on the sales floor. I think of, just all the furniture out there in the world, and I won't name any brands in a disparaging way, but, there's some popular, expensive furniture brands charging thousands of dollars for things that doesn't have joinery, that doesn't, it's not built to last. The optics are nice, but that old world skill of making something that'll last for generations is harder to come by. And with that, I think the customer is less trained to look for it. And that's, I think, what we're getting at here too, is a lot of times customers aren't asking those questions. So sales staff don't have to have that knowledge. It becomes sort of a negative feedback loop.
Insert this podcast, why we wanted to do this whole thing, to try to throw knowledge out there.
Right
Yeah.
now.
Yeah, I would hope that if you called, say, out of the backpack companies that we've been messing with recently, like Stone Glacier, Exo Gear, Kifaru, Mystery Ranch, if you called them, I'd imagine that someone on the phone would be able to give you a solid answer to that question, right?
I think with the brands you just named, I'd be very surprised if they couldn't answer that question. And I think that's sort of back to what I was saying before, where I think what I'm getting at is kind of wanting to justify for your listeners why we continue as consumers to buy from brands like that, right? Because you can get on Amazon right now and find a backpack for a whole lot less money than the brands you just named. And, and I think it'd be a rational question to say, why would I spend $300 on a Mystery Ranch bag as opposed to $30 on, this thing on Amazon that's got 500 great reviews? And I think that the most generalist way to answer that is nobody in today's world, no brand makes an outsized margin. I mean, if you tried to come to market making a enormous margin on things, with how accessible supply chains are now and how easy it is to sell things online, someone's going to undercut that price tomorrow. We are all like, it is more and more the case for companies like Nemo and every other consumer brand out there. It's a hyper competitive world. It's a very transparent and very flat world. So no one's robbing you and making like some ridiculous margin and just pocketing that. So I think the thesis I'm trying to share with your listeners is sort of why, generally speaking, it's still worth it to buy the higher quality gear and support the higher end brands. It's because it is turning into, I think with very few exceptions, those dollars are going to the ingredients that you need to have a piece of equipment that'll do the things that we all as backcountry hunters want to do.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to throw this out there because I just can't let you go without asking this. I know we'll have you on another time, but give me seriously, the 30-second answer because right on the heels, or there's probably people listening right now going yeah, right. That's why you guys make it in China or Thailand or wherever overseas, and you can't tell me that you're not making it for super cheap and making a bunch of money on it. So if possible, try to give me the 30-second answer to that, and we'll leave the deep dive to another day, but go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, great question, and one we have faced and wrestled with many times over the years. This is going to be slightly more than 30 seconds, so I forgive me.
That's all right. I was expecting it.
When I started Nemo, I was actually really determined to do the manufacturing in the U.S. In part out of just sort of pure kind of patriotism, but also in large part because I wanted to be able to easily travel to the factories and kind of do development closely with them and learn from being able to be there, in the chemistry factory, or in the yarn factory, and we have done actually a fair amount of manufacturing in the States over the years. We've had a pretty strong business with special operations, kind of peaked around the Bin Laden mission era, and for a lot of those contracts, we had to sew items in the U.S.
Yeah, that might not be known to everybody, but basically, if you do gear for the U.S. military, it has to be made in the U.S. of A. Correct?
Yeah, it's at enough quantity. It does. That's called the Berry Amendment. So we've got some real experience with that in the category of cut, make, sew. And I think that's a really important distinction. So there are many items, many types of manufacturing where America leads the way, and unequivocally, still makes the best stuff. And there may be little reason to source those items anywhere else in the world, except perhaps to cut costs. But the reality is, what we found, and what other high-end brands in our space have found, is there aren't many Americans that want to sit at a sewing machine anymore. That kind of work, that cut, make, sew work, the skill set, the talent, the investment in it has just moved to other parts of the world. And frankly, in many cases, other parts of the world that haven't sort of developed past wanting to see. I mean, I'd like to think that if you look at our sort of global value chain, the jobs that are American in our value chain are the ones in my office in Southern New Hampshire, which are design, engineering, development, testing, where we're innovating, we're adding value. I mean, they're great. They're well-paying jobs where, we're adding a tremendous amount of value in that process. The parts sort of further upstream that involve dealing with tough chemistries, and doing manual work, like at a sewing machine, those have moved offshore. And the reality is, ecosystems have been built up around those skill sets in other parts of the world, that even if we wanted to, say, move some piece of that to somewhere else, including sort of reshoring it back to the US, it'd be difficult to do it without moving that whole supply chain with it. And so we don't do a lot of manufacturing in China per se. We've actually in the past done more than we do today. We've migrated out of China for various reasons over recent years. But by and large, that Pacific Rim region is the best place in the world to make high-end product like ours, and every high-end brand essentially goes to those places, for the best quality sewing, the best quality fabrics coming out of, Korea, Japan, and so on. So it's really,
that's it.
for us, it's
right
not,
there. You just nailed it. That was your
Yeah.
10-second answer right there. You
Yeah,
said
it was
it.
way more than 30 seconds. But,
And
sorry.
I know that a lot of people are going to still shake their heads and, call you a liar, whatever. We're going to have enough people on this show that will corroborate your story that I hope that down the line we will sort of maybe change, move the needle a little bit, and people will go, okay, I understand why they make that gear over there now.
Well, can I throw one more thing at that?
Yeah, please.
So some years ago, we actually appealed to the Army's Mantech division, Manufacturing Techniques division, for funding to try to develop an alternative to sewing. This is kind of back to something we were talking about earlier, and how I think someday we'll move past punching a whole bunch of holes, in our waterproof products and then patching over them. Largely for the reason that we could reshore that. Like, I think if we could replace sewing with more like a CNC kind of process, that's a higher paying, more technical skill oriented, sitting at a computer kind of job, which I think could be very viable and very competitive in the States. So I don't think for the long run, there's no future in making products like this in the US, but I think as they're made today, they're actually not the most, the supply chain side is not the most desirable jobs in American size.
Thank you for doing your best, a good job explaining it, and for trying to keep it short, because I know we could talk for hours and hours of why people make stuff over there.
O'Reilly Auto Parts are in the business of keeping your car on the road. O'Reilly Auto Parts offer friendly, helpful service and the parts knowledge you need for all your maintenance and repairs. If you're confused about what part you need, like what wipers are going to be the best, what replacement headlights are going to be the best, go into O'Reilly and talk to the people that work there, because they're great and they're super friendly, and they'll get you squared away where you walk out knowing you got the right thing. They've got thousands of parts and accessories in stock, either in-store or online, so you never have to worry if you're in a jam. Do you need your windshield wipers replaced? You need a brake light fixed? You need some quick service? They'll help you find the right part or point you to the nearest local repair shop for help. The professional parts people at O'Reilly Auto Parts are your one-stop shop for all things auto do-it-yourself, and you can find what you need in-store or online. Stop by O'Reilly Auto Parts today or visit us at O'ReillyAuto.com/MeatEater. That's O'ReillyAuto.com/MeatEater. You ever get that feeling you're stuck inside staring at screens and a primal urge kicks in? You crave wide open spaces, fresh air, the chance to connect with the land. Well, maybe it's time to find your own piece of the wild, but searching for property can be a maze. That's where Land.com comes in. They got millions of listings across the country, from mountain ranches to hidden fishing holes. Their search tools are like a seasoned guide helping you narrow down what you want. Land.com isn't just about buying and selling. It's about finding a place to hunt, fish, explore, or simply sit by a campfire and listen to the crickets. So head over to Land.com today to turn one day into today, because trust me, there's nothing quite like the feeling of standing on your own piece of earth. There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store, or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today.
All right. So Jordan and I both landed on this topic as something that we wanted you to talk about, because it's interesting to us. And I think that a lot of listeners, whether you're a backcountry hunter or maybe even not a backcountry hunter, but if you're, a camper, backpacker or whatever, but the new thing in insulation, it's not that new. It's probably 5 or 6 years old, I guess, at least, but it's like waterproofed down, right?
Yes. Yeah.
I want to just talk in general about insulation, but let's start with down, and let's compare waterproof down to regular down, and then we can compare down to synthetics. But I was thinking, well, that's the best thing ever. It's going to be like waterproof down, right? It's like you don't even need synthetics anymore. But then it sort of kind of came about when people started, there were some whispers and everybody's like, yeah, but what if the coatings on the down are actually like limiting how well it performs? So give me the breakdown of the waterproof down thing and then compare waterproof down and regular down like in the environment.
Yeah. A classic and great question. So down just continues to be this totally amazing thing. Like if you get the chance to, and you could Google search it and see it, but if you look at a down feather under a microscope, it's a pretty amazing little structure. And we haven't yet been able to kind of replicate the fractal nature of that structure in a manufacturing process. I mean, what makes the down feather such an effective insulator is, it has this kind of relatively rigid little spine, which holds some volume, like it pushes some things away. It declares a little bit of airspace for itself. And then it fills that airspace with all these little teeny microscopic tendrils, which restrict airflow. And it's that restriction of airflow that produces that insulating effect. And synthetic insulations come a long way. It's closer than ever to replicating the insulating power of the down feather, but it does not match it. And so for that reason, as you said, Giannis, brands and their suppliers have wanted to figure out how to overcome the one weakness of down, which is when it gets wet, all of that goes away. That little structure takes on water and kind of all those little tendrils that would stick out there and stop air from moving, they kind of fold in on themselves and ball up. So I lose track of time now, but it was probably something like 10, 15 years ago, we started to see the first available treated down. And Nemo is an early customer of that. And it's proven to be quite effective. As you said, anything you do that sort of adds some mass or chemistry to that down feather is inherently going to have a trade-off. Mm-hmm. So you do see some very marginal decline in the dry performance of a down feather as you treat it with things, but marginal. So I'd say by and large, a treated, and I should say too, they don't become waterproof. It's really a water resistance. Mm-hmm. But treated down feathers have performed well, and I think is a good choice. There's also a whole universe of synthetic materials, and I think what it really comes down to for the consumer when making this choice is really the amount of water you're going to be exposed to. And I think the tricky part, right, with hunting is we're out at the worst time of the year to be able to answer that question reliably. Because it's mm-hmm. like, do you know for sure that this fall it's not going to rain ever when you're out, or even when you get into November, December, right? I mean, at least where we are, I mean, it very well might, rain in December here. But the question is, even if it rains, is your bag really likely to get soaked?
Yes.
And I think if it is, whether in your pack it's going to get soaked or in your tent, then synthetic remains the sort of safer choice. I think if you can have some confidence that you'll be able to keep your bag relatively dry, then down's natural properties are still tough to beat. So it still remains sort of a hard question to answer in absolutes.
The synthetic insulation, why does it perform so well when it's wet?
It's hydrophobic, so it doesn't want water. It doesn't want to absorb water.
Okay. So therefore, you still, even if you soak your bag, you're still going to have some heat retention value with that. Whereas if you were even the treated down, if that was to get completely soaked, it would not retain any heat retention.
Yeah, correct. And we've all experienced this, right? Like been caught out, in the rain in a puff jacket, say, and a down puff jacket, and the puff is gone when it's wet, right? And again, what creates insulating value in clothing and in sleeping bags is just trapped air. So, if your down puff jacket just completely loses its loft, it's essentially lost its insulating power. And on the other hand, we all have been out there in a synthetic jacket and had it got wet and still had it, remain kind of remarkably lofty. And that ability to retain some loft when wet is where you're getting some warmth when wet from a synthetic insulation.
Yeah, I certainly, as far as my just like personal plan for that, migrated, and this was a while ago, but definitely away from synthetics, even when I was going to Alaska a lot and just being like, you know what, I can use a completely waterproof stuff sack. Then it can be in my backpack, which can have another waterproof lining or maybe a rain cover over it. And it just doesn't come out until it's inside of the tent, and that's kind of been the way that I've handled that situation, and mostly just going that route because of the weight. But I think now, is it true? Can you almost get just as light in some of the new synthetic materials as you can in the high end down?
Yep, it gets closer all the time, but I think a way maybe to look at it is, if you sort of go out to the extreme, what does a high altitude mountaineer carry today? And it's still a down bag. So
Right.
if you're looking for, minus 40 degree performance, in other words, and you want the smallest packing, lightest weight bag at those kind of temperatures, down is still leading the way out in those extremes. But, again, just thinking about it in terms of value for the consumer, down is expensive. And if you don't need minus 40 degree performance and, you want to hedge the bet a little bit around things getting wet, like, you're not, you worry that maybe that, you're going to forget to seal the roll top on your stuff sack, Giannis, or water is going to, you're sleeping with a tarp, or you're in a floorless tent and in a super ultralight kind of situation or something, and groundwater may get on your bag. Synthetic can be a great, versatile and a little bit less expensive alternative.
Yeah, I just bought sleeping bags for my 2 kids, and they were synthetic.
Yeah.
It saved me a couple $100 at least,
Could you give a quick rundown of like fill powers? A lot of times you'll see like, whichever. I was looking at a sleeping bag the other day, and it comes in different options of fill powers, and I'm like, well, can you give a quick explanation on that? Yeah.
That's a good question, because I like, just because I sold sleeping bags, I have a good understanding of it. But I think right on the heels of Fill Power 2, you can roll into sort of like temperature ratings, and and that'll be a good way to finish this out.
Yeah. So Fill Power is kind of back to what I was saying about this. So first of all, it applies to down. Although personally, I would love to see the industry move to more of a universal standard there that included synthetic. And we're actually contemplating that a little bit and how we might go about that. But for the time being,
idea.
Fill Power applies to down feathers and kind of comes back to that stiff little spine that's in the down feather and kind of its ability to create some volume around itself. So the most desirable down feathers are the ones that occupy the most amount of airspace with the least amount of weight. So if airspace is what makes insulation, that makes a lot of sense, right? You want the lightest weight bag possible that has the most loft possible, simultaneously. A lot of loft, very little weight. So, and the way the Fill Power numbers work is the higher the number, the higher that ability to kind of make volume per weight. So when you get into the 750, 800 and above, which gets pretty exotic range, that's a pretty special and pretty rare little down feather that is creating this awesome little volume of air around it with very little weight. And because those those feathers are relatively special, that drives up the cost quite a bit, because that's, hand picking out the most perfect little down feathers and then organizing them by their ability to sort of create volume. And the ones you'll end up with the most of are, at the lower end of that range, in that kind of 500 range.
A good way for me to understand it's always worked is like if you imagined let's just take 3 different fill powers, and if you took 3 glass jars, say like a quart-sized jar, and you took, just pick your favorite unit of measurement, but let's just say like an ounce of each different type of feather. You had an ounce of 650, an ounce of 750, and then an ounce of 900. It's the same amount of weight, but when you put them into that glass jar in separate ones, the 650 is going to go up, I'm just making these numbers up, but let's just say 2 inches. The 750 is going to go up 4 inches, and then the 900 is going to go up 6 inches. It still weighs the same, but you've got literally 3 times the amount of loft or fill in that 900 jar versus the 650 jar. And again, those are hypothetical made up numbers, but that's basically how it works. That like for the same amount of weight, you're getting a whole bunch more loft, which should make the bag warmer, right?
Yes. Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, and just remembering that loft is exactly what your insulation is. That's what makes warmth. To the question of the ratings, so that gets pretty wonky. And this is another area where Nemo and other specialty brands and some of our retail partners are really trying to think if there's a better way for the customer to kind of organize this stuff. But today, we rate temperatures by 3 different scales: T comfort, T limit, and T extreme. And this is pretty nerdy, but essentially it's related to your metabolism and how you sleep at night. So a T comfort rating is based on you having, say, a slower metabolism and more likely to sleep cold. And a T limit is you tend to sleep a little warmer. And T extreme is actually the temperature at which it's believed is kind of the minimum temperature that a human being is going to survive. So, if you know, point being, if you know that you tend to sleep cold, then you want to be shopping on a T comfort scale. That's the scale that sort of correlates to folks.
Now, and you're saying that all bags now will kind of have 3 different numbers on them?
It gets dicey. It's different by brand. In many cases, 2 or 3 of those numbers will be indicated. In some cases, it's only the T limit. Typically, right now, men's bags are rated on a T limit scale, and women's bags are rated on a T comfort scale. And a brand may or may not sort of declare that. But it's a pretty safe assumption that, if you're shopping for a men's bag, the rating is based on T limit. And if you're shopping for a woman's bag today, it's based on T comfort. And it depends where you are in the temperature range. This is where it gets just ridiculously wonky. But generally speaking, it's about a 10 or 15 degree difference in temperature. So a woman's bag, say rated at 30 degrees, that same exact bag would be rated a 20 or a 15 degree bag for a quote man. And you can see where this gets sticky too, because, some women sleep hot at night or cold at night. Some men sleep hot or cold at night. So correlating it to gender doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. It really should be, the whole system should be based on just kind of how you sleep. Would be a lot easier for customers to kind of land in a spot where they end up comfortable. Yeah,
I've definitely had different 0 degree bags, and I can tell you for a fact that I sleep way hotter in some of them than I do the other ones.
Yeah, it gets real sticky. I'd say and this is sort of back to something we were saying earlier, where you're placing trust in a brand when you spend your money, right? And I think in any of the brands you named, Giannis, or any of the brands we would all agree are kind of iconic specialty brands in this space. I think you can trust that they're testing at a reliable test agency, and those are good. Those are good, honest, published results. But another thing that happens is no 2 bags are exactly the same, and no one publishes, including Nemo, no one publishes their bag temperature as 16.79 degrees. You know, they're all 10 degree, 15 degree, 20 degrees. So there's a certain amount of rounding that's happening there as well. You know, depending on the construction of the bag and the insulation, down, for example, can settle within a bag, you know, so unless you construct a bag to handle that, and unless you take care of your bag and kind of fluff it up and pay attention to this, you can easily have cold spots. You can put a sleeping bag on a pad that doesn't match the insulating value of the sleeping bag. And that, you know, is an integral part of that sort of insulating envelope around you. So you could be in a minus 40 degree bag and laying on a sleeping pad that has an R value of 1. You're squishing all the insulation below you in that sleeping bag. So it's basically doing nothing below you. And then you've got an R value that doesn't match that minus 40 degrees. And it could be 0 degrees out and you're freezing your butt off, right? Mm-hmm. You're thinking, what's wrong with this minus 40 degree bag? Sure. But it's really a matter of not having the pad that matches. So it gets wonky.
Yeah. You got to know how to use all that stuff together.
Yeah. System. Yeah. All right, we're going to do a Fix It segment. We're going to throw out a hypothetical scenario. You get to camp, you pack in, you blow up your sleeping pad, you know, you cook dinner or whatever. You go to get back on your sleeping pad and it's deflated a little bit. So you've got some kind of hole or something in it. Where would you start? I guess, you know, let's do a hole first, and then maybe let's say it's leaking from the valve stem type situation. What do you do?
Got it. Great question, and certainly a real world question. So the first thing I'd want to do is make sure that the valve is in fact operating correctly and closed all the way. It's pretty easy, depending on there's lots of different kinds of sleeping pad valves out there, but pretty easy to get a piece of grit, you know, stuck, say, under an O-ring or caught kind of in the interface of a cap. You know, and that's happened to me before. So I, you know, as much as you can, want to kind of disassemble that, inspect it, make sure that it's not just a valve issue. If you're sort of, once you move past that, the challenge then would become trying to locate where that leak is. And I have found over the years that most of the time, if I have a puncture in a pad in a pretty quiet environment, like out in the backcountry, if you get everyone to be quiet around you, and you just take a minute and sort of move that pad past your face, the combination of kind of feeling the air draft on your cheeks and listening carefully with your ear, I'm usually able to find that. So I'd kind of do a careful inspection all around, see if I could locate where that hole was. Fixing that then will become a matter of...
You think you can actually like pinpoint the hole, or do you have to then maybe put on some water or something to actually see the bubbles?
You can do that. Yeah, like a little soapy water can be great. Of course, then, you know, you've got soapy water on stuff. Sure. In my case, I've had pretty good luck. And really, it's as much about your ear as it is about the little hairs and nerves on your cheeks. If you kind of move that pad across your face, you're going to feel that little draft of air. And actually, I find I'm usually able to really kind of zero in on that. And then most of the time, or say many times, you're going to be able to, when it comes down to it, once you're in the zone, you're going to be able to visually see, oh, there's the little slice that came from the pocket knife I left in my pocket, or my keys, or whatever, you know, or the thorn on the ground, or whatever it was. Mm-hmm. And then you're down to the matter of how you seal that up. And hopefully your pad has with it some means of doing that, whether that's, you know, a little bit of like a urethane adhesive, or a self-adhesive style patch, which would make that pretty straightforward as long as it's small. Otherwise, your best bet is going to be, hopefully in your kit, you've got some other manner of tape, like maybe some duct tape. That won't be, any sort of tape solution is very unlikely to be a permanent solution. You know, so you're still going to most likely get air seeping out kind of through the yarns of the fabric underneath, whatever that, unless you can get a glue down in there to kind of seal that up, you're going to get a slow leak. So, you know, that night might be about sleeping for a couple of hours, putting a little bit more air back in. I'd probably want to bolster that pad with taking some extra kit, like maybe take the foam out of your pack or take some extra clothing, Find some pine boughs, some other things, that you could put under your pad, and particularly if, it's late season and you're on frozen ground, can kind of shore up the insulating power of the pad.
When you're applying the adhesive or tape or whatever you're doing, would you do that with the pad completely inflated or deflated?
No, you're going to want very little air pressure in it because particularly if it's like a adhesive, it's going to be pushing air up through that. So if you try to put a seam grip, like a urethane adhesive over that, and you have any air pressure in there, it's just going to be making little air bubbles up through that and sort of spoiling that connection. If you can do all those things, by the way, that's pretty sweet too. If you can get a little dab of some manner of glue on there to kind of lock up around where that hole is and then shore that up with some tape, there's no harm in kind of overdoing it.
So you'd probably have a permanent fix at that point.
You may have a permanent fix. Yeah. And you'll know. I mean, if you make it through the night with, no or very little apparent loss in air pressure, you're probably good to go, right? Because the next night, let's say you only need a pad really to hold air for 8 or 10 hours at the most.
Right. Jordan likes to sleep about 14 hours but for most of us.
That Tenacious tape from Gear Aid is good
stuff.
tape. Yep, that I carry with me that I've patched pads with before, and
yeah. Still, if you can seal that underneath that, just because if you think of the fabric as a weave, there's still little air gaps like through those yarns and things. So even as great as a tape like that is, it can't get kind of down in there to seal up around all those little yarns. So the best thing is if you can get a glue in there in addition to that.
Well, Cam, thank you so much, man. We appreciate your time. We'll let you get out of here. But that was great. I learned a lot, and hopefully Jordan did and everybody else listening. So thank you. And let's keep emailing back and forth and come up with another list of fun, techie gear topics to talk about. And we'll have you back on here in a little bit.
Sounds great. Well, thanks so much, guys. Truly an honor and a lot of fun.
Awesome.
All right.
Thanks, Cam.
Take care, Cam.
Cheers.
You ever get that feeling the walls closing in, the concrete jungle suffocating you? You crave some wide open spaces, the chance to connect with nature, maybe in a spot all your own. Well, head over to land.com. They've got ranches, forests, mountains, streams, you name it. Search by acreage. You can search by location. You can search by the kind of hunting and fishing you're dreaming of. Land.com. It is where the adventure begins. Hey guys, turkey season is in full swing right now, and if you are planning on getting after it, make sure to pick up some Meat Eater Phelps turkey calls to stuff into the old turkey vest or into your fanny pack right now. I carry a few different things. I like to use mouth calls, and I like to use pot calls. Mouth calls or diaphragms, I like them because it gives you hand-free calling, meaning when you're working a bird up close, you can have your gun on your knee, finger on the trigger, ready to roll, and still be making turkey sounds. I like pot calls because I just like pot calls. I enjoy calling with a pot call. Whatever direction you go, including a box call, which I don't personally use too much, but they're fun and great, and I started out with them. Yanni, on the other hand, one of my main turkey hunting buddies, he loves box calls. And what's funny is I'll now and then look to him and give him the look that means get out your box call and find us a turkey. So it's not that I don't like them. I just have Yanni use his. Then I don't have to carry it. Go to Phelps Game Calls. Get calls that are made in the USA and get calls that'll get them close. Find yours at phelpsgamecalls.com today.